So when we started this, Paul mentioned that we were going to start with Joe at the horse's mouth, and I'm afraid this means we've made it to the other end of the horse. Okay, there we go. So it's funny, BIS and the presentation that Paul just gave you is all about enterprise resource processing, or ERP systems. It's all about running our business. SOMS and BIS are actually two sides of the coin for our organization. The SOMS system is all about running the other side of our business. BIS tracks all the employees, all our purchasing and everything. SOMS does exactly the opposite. It tracks all of our offenders and their programming and everything that we do with offenders. So SOMS is really a collection of a couple of systems. There are two major components to it. When an inmate comes to the department, they get off the bus and they're carrying a piece of paper, in essence. It's a paper from the court that says what they've been committed for, how long they're supposed to be here, the basic information about that inmate. So when the day they get here, it's one piece of paper or a small file, but that file builds and builds and builds. So somebody that's been here for 10, 20, 30 years, you can envision that file now is legal boxes of paper about that inmate, and it's everything we know about the inmate. So one of the components of SOMS is to do away with all of that paper, to take all of that history about an inmate and to digitize it. So that's the first major component of this, is really getting rid of that and taking away that paper file that now had transitioned from institution to institution, location to location, even person to person in the institution, and make that an electronic system. The second piece is what we call the Electronic Offender Management System, or EOMAS. That is the transactional system that now stops us from producing paper in the first place. So our processes within the prison itself are actually automated. So, and I'm going to try to run through this fairly quickly because I know we're a little bit pressed for time. So I'm not going to speak to everything that's on all of these slides, but I'm happy to answer some questions if anybody has some after the fact. So EOMAS is a commercial off-the-shelf system that we're implementing. And as I mentioned, it really is implementing the transactions within the prison. It's a web-based application. It's centralized, which provides a bunch of utility that we didn't used to have. So now someone comes off the bus, we check them in the system. It's kind of like checking in at a hotel. And that information now grows. Anyone in the state that has the rights to access that information can go into that system and pull it up right now. A lot of times in a lot of processes in the paper world, a counselor would see an inmate and they send something through the paper process and it makes it to their file 3 weeks later. Well, if that document was something that's supposed to extend an inmate's sentence and they got out a week ago, you've just missed the boat. The inmate was supposed to be delayed and wasn't. So this system automates all of those processes and has made that much, much more effective and much, much more efficient. As far as schedule goes, that digitization project that I mentioned, we implemented that at the women's institutions back in 2010. So our women's institutions have no paper files. They have no C file about an inmate. It is all in the system. This system also is centralized, can be accessed from anywhere. So you can imagine the efficiencies when we have a plaintiff situation or a court situation. We can have people from across the state looking at that system, looking at that document at the same time. We don't have to pull things out. We don't have to fax it across the state. It makes that system much more efficient. The implementation at the men's institutions, we're about halfway through that. David mentioned we're about 45%. The statistics you see here are several weeks old. In that system at the men's institutions, we've scanned 65,000 files. And in those files, there's 34 million images or 34 million documents, and that puts us at about 41% complete. We'll be finishing that project in the spring, and at that point, there will be no inmate paper files in the state of California, which is a pretty monumental task. For the EOMAS system, we started with a foundation. We started with what we call intake, movements, and counts. Intake is that first piece when an inmate comes off the bus and we initiate that record. We start with the demographics about an inmate and it grows from there in the system. In those demographics, the first thing we do is sit down with an inmate and do what's called an initial housing review. Do you live well with others? What's your commitment? A bunch of things like that equate to a business process of saying you can live in this type of facility. It's a level 1, it's a level 4, things along those lines. And then once we have that criteria, do you have a bad ankle? You can't have a top bunk, or anything along those lines. From that point, the SOMS system actually recommends a location, recommends the bed based on those type of attributes. And from that point forward, every movement activity, every assignment of a bed is done in the SOMS system. Doesn't matter whether you're moving from cell A to cell B and it's next door, or across the state, or even to an out-of-state facility, it's all done in the SOMS system. Without having that acknowledgement in the system, they don't move it. And part of the reason that's important is a safety aspect. Now the people at the receiving facility can look it up and they know exactly who's coming and why and when they're going to be there. And one of the foundational things is a count. Within our institutions, we do roughly 6 counts a day. They take all different forms, but that is the reconciliation to make sure we have absolutely every inmate in the right place. So if you think about that process, one of these being a small city at 2,000 people, or a larger institution at over 4,000 people, if everybody was in their cell all day, it wouldn't be too bad. But they're in classes, they've got job assignments, they're all over. And if you envision someone who works in the kitchen, they might be in the kitchen at 2 in the morning. Somebody who works at the furniture manufacturing plant might be there until late in the evening. Preparing for a count and reconciling that used to take 2 hours just to get ready to do the count. Now you press the button and SOMS is there. It knows where everyone is, where they're assigned to be, takes care of that for you. The human involvement of doing a count, still the same. You still have to physically count everybody, but the preparation, the reconciliation is all in the system now. It lets the custody officers focus on being a custody officer, not producing paper. Scheduling, that's actually inmate scheduling. So this is one of the reasons the federal receivership exists. We had different lines of business, different disciplines, scheduling an inmate to be at several different places at the same time. So literally, an inmate could be scheduled to see a dentist, a mental health clinician, a medical clinician, and a counselor at the same time, and none of the other parties knew about it. So it's all in the system now. It works just like an Outlook calendar. If I want to see Joe, hypothetically, his counselor would go in and set that appointment. Well, there's bumping rules. If his medical clinician needs to see him, it automatically bumps him and reschedules his appointment. We now know exactly where the inmate is supposed to be, and it's greatly improved our ability to provide access to care, which moves us a great step forward in being able to resolve a lot of the issues that we've had that the receiver is working to solve. Holds, warrants, and detainers. You can imagine that a lot of our inmates are not necessarily the nicest guys. They haven't done just one thing, so they could be wanted in another jurisdiction, or vice versa. We have warrants out for someone who's being held in another jurisdiction. The system now brokers all of that to make sure that we don't set somebody free, essentially, or parole them when in fact they're wanted in Maricopa County in Arizona or in another jurisdiction. So that's all managed within the system. Visitation and caseload assignment. Caseload assignment essentially assigns each inmate to their counselor, to their case records person. Those folks, it manages their workflow. So it manages the caseload and tells them when they have things coming up, whether it's a 60-day audit because the inmate is being prepared to parole, or the counselor needing to do some job evaluation of what the inmate can do. Visitation, David mentioned the VPAS system. This is, again, is the other side of that. The VPAS is the public-facing side of an application that says I can schedule time with an inmate. SOMS does everything behind the wall. So it's actually the processing of the applications. When you apply to come see someone at an institution, that process is centralized in the SOMS system. We check your background, make sure that you're not a visitor at 19 different prisons, which has a security connotation to it and things along those lines. We had instances where someone would be denied the ability to see an inmate, and literally at an institution 5 miles away, they didn't know there was a denial. They approved the visitor. And a lot of times there's good reason for those denials, should make it system-wide. Most recently, we deployed something called sentence calculation, and this is probably the monster of SOMS for the technical component. Sentence calculation takes that information that we receive from a court, and from that moment forward, it calculates the release date or the parole date for an inmate. And if the laws never changed and nobody ever did anything bad, it would be easy. But we have people that have multiple commitments at the same time, and then they come into prison and they get in a fight, and that adds 2 days. Or they go to a substance abuse class, and that takes 2 weeks off. Every transaction caused an entire recalculation of their sentence. We have a small army of people that do nothing but calculate sentences for inmates. It is horribly complex. And you can imagine some of the guys that have been with us for a long time, the sentencing rules have changed 2 or 3 times, or 2 or 3 dozen times since they've been incarcerated. Makes it very complex. Well, in August, we turned this on, and it has gone very well. The system now calculates the date for every new inmate. Right now, it's calculating the date for all of our inmates that have been here for some period of time, and we are now calculating very effectively the release dates and have eliminated a huge proportion of the human error that went on in that process. So for usage, and I'll run through this very quickly, our ERMS system, that digitization system, has about 30,000 users that use it. The EOMS system, the transactional system, because it's every custody officer in the state, about 51,000 users on a month are using it. It processes a huge number of transactions for the actual visitors coming on the prison grounds, movements between facilities, and someone has a heart attack, for example, they go out to a hospital, that counts as an external movement, things along those lines. The intake and the bed assignments. We move people through beds. 100,000 a month is how many beds we'd fill going forward. So the future of SOMS, we're continuing to roll things out. We've built the foundation. There's other functionality that can be added here around discipline, gangs, appeals, transportation, property. We will also be rehosting this. Since the implementation, the original implementation, we've been hosting this at our partner, Hewlett-Packard's data center. We'll be transitioning to the state data center in the next couple of years. We've just kicked that process off. But that's a very in-depth process when you think about the 24/7 nature of this, the reliability requirements, and actually moving that, physically moving that instance from one data center to another. It's one of the major tasks. So as we go forward with some of these efforts, obviously in the future we'll be reaching out to the vendor community to pull in some additional assistance, whether it's the rehosting effort or expanding the functionality that already exists. Those are the things that will be coming in the future. So I know that was quick, but thank you very much. I'll turn it back over to
you. Paul, are you going to come back up?
So are there any questions? First of all, thank you, gentlemen and people. Really appreciate it. So we have a couple mics in the back. Are there any questions for Joe?
Now be kind now, because remember your release date? All right. All right.
And by the way, you guys are probably captured at the state. But any questions for Joe?
Who's got the first question?
What they're doing with corrections. Come on. Really?
I've got a number of written questions here, Paul. So why don't we start off with one of these? Okay, this one is from a vendor. As a vendor, how should I best approach you to discuss opportunities? What advice do you have for me?
Don't send emails. I think all of the AIOs and CIOs probably get 30, 40, 50 emails a day, and they kind of start off, I know Amy mentioned this a couple weeks ago, almost like they know you, and then you get down to the bottom, you're going like, who is this person? Never even met them. I think the key is we're all busy. You guys are all busy. I would hope that this presentation was very informative on what we're doing in all of our different lines of business. That's kind of why Davude put those bubbles up there, because you can see that they cross multiple different areas, and some of those areas may have applicability to some of the products and services that you do. I would say go back and reflect on what we presented today and then take a look at that. We're looking for things that are going to expand how we deliver our services, how we increase access, how we're going to save the department money if it's a zero-sum game. So if you have some of those ideas that make sense. The other thing is we're not looking to be, the first adopters, to be honest with you. We're looking to where, have you done this in some other law enforcement, peace officer, correctional environment? And so if you have a business case, use case, and you've been able to measure that, that adds a lot of credibility to us.
Okay, any other questions from the audience?
Hey Joe, Brian Jones from SAS. I got a question for you on the budget. I was wondering if you could break down the funding sources for the annual budget that you have of $8.7 billion. Sort of
Yeah, it's all general fund, but half my budget is personnel and the other half of it is OE&E, which is difficult because a lot of times in our program areas, a lot of it is more high on salary base on personal services and less on O&E. But when you have the type of interwoven of technology embedded into the business that we have, there's a lot of reoccurring costs as far as maintenance and hardware and support and renewals. So I'm about 50-50 right there.
Next question. Okay, I've got one here in writing. This is for Russ. It's regarding the EOIS system, no paper files. Is there no retention schedule? How do we meet the legal requirements?
So we've actually worked quite a bit with our legal folks. The system of record actually is the electronic system now. So in fact, if we wanted to take a paper document into the court, they would challenge us and say that is no longer the actual official record. It is the electronic system.
Anyone from the audience?
Hi, I'm Michael Rulis, Department of State Hospitals. You guys were talking about the time and shift, and we're also looking into implementing something of the sort. You mentioned that you were doing the 35,000 custody staff. I wondered if there was any looking into, although there's no need to schedule, say, administrative staff, because they work the standard shifts. Have you looked into putting them into the system at all? Are you considering putting them in the system at all to give you an accurate picture of cost in terms of statewide staffing costs?
Sure. When we initiated the project, the scope was just the custody staff, and it was just for the institutions in the custody, not the administrative staff. But once we've rolled it out and we've seen the functionality and seen the ease of using it, in the future we could probably look at rolling in our administrative staff as well. But again, that's something that we would have to look at and do an analysis of and see whether it's a good decision for the department. But it does have the capability.
Okay, anyone else in the audience? There's a written question. With such a big department, what issues are you facing from an IT management perspective?
I'll open this up to anybody that wants to answer it up here. We have issues every day because of just our size and complexity, and when we want to take on something, just the magnitude and the cost to do something. So very, very few things that we do at the enterprise level is insignificant. It takes a lot of resources, a lot of commitment from the program side, and then a lot of initial investment. And then you have to make sure, just from a sustainability standpoint, that we can support it. So, we have to be very careful on what we take on. That's why we have a pretty, I think, strong governance process to take a look at that, because you have to make sure that you have the right organization capacity to do that. It's not really the technology. It's really the things that both Russ and Paul talked about. It's the organization capacity, the readiness, the ability of the programs to adopt and adapt. So for us, it really is making sure from a resource capacity, can we take that on and can we be successful? And so our governance process has really helped us in that area. Anybody want to add anything?
Yeah, I think Joe, I'd like to reiterate a little bit. In these times in which staffs are getting smaller and budgets are getting smaller, we now have to look at things for return on investment. We have to look at things and say, what kind of resources can we put forward to get the best bang for our buck, the best investment. No longer are we able to put our fingers in a whole bunch of different pies. We have to be very selective now. And I think that is actually leading to our management groups becoming, better planners, better organizers, and just out of need.
Russ or Daboud, anything you want to add to that?
I have a couple of comments to add. I'm glad someone recognized that size matters. And I think it does. Having worked at different departments, I can tell you for sure that in this case size matters because the typical issues that any IT organization runs into, it's multiplied by a magnitude. Simple issues: security, project management, budgetary, attendance, labor, etc., and etc. So when you have an organization, 50,000 employees, dealing with that as well as dealing with the IT stuff that goes on, it's all the hard and soft part of IT that you need to deal with in an organization this large. And it is through governance that, and prioritizing the work that we do that determines which one gets done first and which issues get addressed first.
And then before you ask the next question, this kind of gets back to where, you know, I'm very proud of, you know, our management team and the supervisors and the staff. If you take a look at, and I think Cal HR did this several years ago, they went out and they looked at the number of employees and the number of IT positions by department, the department's budget and your base operating budget. We are at 1%. That's pretty lean. And so we've done heroics, and we've done a lot. And we've done it also with you guys out there from the vendor community helping us move forward. So we're a pretty lean, mean machine, but we get things done.
Okay, next question is one we received in writing. You mentioned, David, IT governance just a second ago. Who is on your IT governance board, and how often do you meet?
Joe covered that a little bit, but our directors of all the divisions, including Joe, who chairs the IT governance board, and currently the director of our admin division is the co-chair. But we meet once a month. We have an agenda that gets sent to the team, to the board, a week before. We follow up with minutes. We have a yearly report to the governance board that was just published, by the way, and shared with them because we've been going on for about a year now. So the governance board is very important, and it comes handy, especially when decisions need to be made of going forward or not, and which one do we go first with.
You know, what is interesting is they're asking the right questions. I'll give you an example. We mentioned the 120 plus IT systems. And so they asked us to go back and meet with each of the program areas and go through their portfolio. One, validate those systems. A lot of those directors didn't know they even had those systems serving them. That was kind of an eye-opener. So one, we had a chance to educate them. Two, we had to ask the question, you know, do you still need that system? You know, or three, could we merge and consolidate? And then, you know, how much was it costing to maintain and support that system, both from an IT resource and OE&E and from a program side. So they're having us now go through that entire process to look at our overall portfolio. We're about maybe a third into it where we'll be able to start to go back and put some really kind of hard decisions in front of them and take a look at some consolidation and maybe actually some decommissioning. Most people don't really want to talk about that. But the hard choices are there, and the body now is holding each of them accountable. So that's some of the stuff that they've asked for, which I think is a different perspective.
Joe, the Boston bombers were identified pretty quickly and captured through video surveillance. What does the prison currently do around the country for video surveillance for all the institutions, 34 institutions around the state?
Wow. We have video surveillance in the institutions. So I mean that's in all of the prisons where we have that. I'm not really sure where to go with that, to be honest with you. There's really tight security controls on getting in. There's checks on employee validation coming in. There's searches that are done on any type of vehicles. You know that we're implementing the managed access to get rid of the illegal cell phone use, which ends up causing a lot of inappropriate types of activities. I think David covered some of the other things. If you kind of looked on some of the emerging technologies that we'll be able to look at and explore as well, as far as biometrics and some other things. We do have an Office of Correctional Safety that deals with a lot of our criminal intelligence. I think you saw a bullet there called intelligence, looking into the future. And we really didn't talk about that because of security implications. We kind of don't really go public on what we're doing from that perspective.
Question back here.
Chad Hodges with ENS. With so many, obviously you guys have very large, complex environments. I'm sure the community at large would like to know that, as those environments are needing to be enhanced, is there going to be any future RFIs, RFPs, things of that nature that are going to need to hit the street so that those enhancements can be achieved?
Speak to any of that?
As far as the BIZ project goes, we're currently have a few RFPs out there that are going to be going for, especially dealing with big data mining. Now that we have the system, now that it's stable, now people are starting to ask for information out of it. And so, again, organic staff or the CDCR staff, we're learning how to do it. So we're probably going to want to be able to augment our skill set from the vendor community. So those will probably be coming out in the next couple months.
Russ, do you want to add anything about? You kind of covered that on your slide a little bit.
Yeah, I spoke to it a little bit. For our rehosting effort, actually anything that would come out would likely come out through OTEC, through the data center, for those specific skill sets. But when you implement any of these large systems, I think I'm in the same position that Paul's in. There are skill sets that are hard for the state to maintain, especially those one-time transitional type skill sets. So we bring in some hired guns to help with those. Right now, we don't have anything planned or in the pipeline to let, but in the future, I would absolutely see that's something we'll have to do.
I will re-emphasize the two that I mentioned in my presentation. It was for the PBX upgrade, our telephone system upgrade to make it VoIP ready, as well as our radio infrastructure upgrade. Those two RFPs should hit the street within the next 2 to 4 weeks.
Okay, next question in writing here. For the past couple of years, your department has requested Department of Finance and Legislative funding approval to complete a system upgrade of your public safety radio communications network for all of your institutions. Can you update us on the department's efforts to receive funding and your anticipated schedule to complete the upgrade, including number of prisons and timing of RFPs, etc.?
Yeah, internally we have what they call a budget concept statement. We developed one of those, submitted it. It was approved, and then we developed the actual BCP. That document was approved internally. Now it is over at Finance under consideration. We have not heard yet back on that. As soon as we do, we'll let you know. In the meantime, we have been working on developing the actual radio microwave procurement document and been working with Department of Technology and also Public Safety and Radio Division. So we're working on that document. If the BCP was approved, it would be fiscal year 14-15 when funding would come in. We do have some baseline funding in our budget, so we'll be looking at what we can do initially this year with the actual BCP being, like I said, in fiscal year 14-15 in July.
Okay, any more questions from the audience? Last question.
I just was curious. I think the biggest part of this whole transformation is that you have to change the culture. And Paul, you talked a lot about culture change. I'm just curious, how did you do that? How did you get the buy-in from years and years of people who've been on staff to make these changes? Because it's heroic in its own self.
Well, initially we started with failure. Really, we did. We thought we had a plan. We thought we had the right communication plan. It didn't work. Then we all of a sudden had to start reestablishing trust inside the organization. We had to prove that the system worked. We had to prove that it was going to be a benefit to them. We had to prove that they were now connected to each other, and we had to listen a lot. We had to really start having meetings in which we really listened and then asked the hard questions. Okay, you've told me what you want, so what are you going to do to change to get there? And what happened was once we started to do that and we showed that we could be a partner with them, our businesses started to engage us on a daily basis. And the funny thing is, when I first got to the biz program, I said, listen, our goal is to become the experts in the industry, that our business, so much so that our businesses will come to us and ask us advice. So what we did was, instead of saying, no, 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 just do it, we said, okay, how do you want to do it? And we asked them that question, and they kept coming up with us. Some of the stuff was system stuff we had to fix. But a lot of it just had to do with business. And then they all of a sudden realized that they actually had control. And then having control, they had buy-in. It was not an easy process. It did not happen overnight. So.
And one thing that I would want to add to that, and that totally is crucial, but one of the other things is that you can't lose sight of having a strong executive sponsor behind your projects. Biz, we didn't talk a lot about it, but it's a joint partnership with Correctional Healthcare, the receivership. So we had their executive sponsorship, Clark Kelso, and at the time Elaine Bush. We had our executive sponsorship, Martin Ossino and Dr. Tosh. I'm telling you that, that is critical to move forward projects of this magnitude. Without that type of support and commitment, and you're crossing multiple lines of businesses and different divisions that you have no authority over those resources, you better have an executive champion and sponsorship in place that's committed. And we did.
So I'll expand on that just a little bit. I think we did something very similar to Biz. We had outstanding sponsors on the SOMS project. We spoke a little bit about IT governance, kind of the umbrella over all of IT. On the SOMS project itself, our steering committee had both undersecretaries for the department and the federal receiver. We get together in our steering committees once a month. Every other week, literally every other week, we had the directors over adult institutions and the other lines of business. Not their designees, not a bunch of other folks. The directors would actually show up and participate in the process of guiding the project. And part of their investment was they applied the right folks. So in our case records area, for example, we have 3 of the 6 highest ranking case records people in the state working on our project. They didn't send us their newest hires. They didn't send us people that have been in the institutions for 20 minutes. They sent the experts to set the foundation of how it will work for the next umpteen years. They made that investment and took it out of hide at a time where it's very hard to do that. And they did that across case records, across custody, all the different lines of business. So it really is a testament to the fortitude of our leadership in the department to be able to see that they needed to make that investment in order to make it pay off.
And then, I know you want to close, right? But I want to close before he closes. Because I got the mic. First of all, we kept you way beyond the 90 minutes. And so, from the bottom of our hearts, we're really thankful and grateful that you took the time out of your schedules and listened to us. We wanted to break up the presentation so you could hear and see some of the outstanding management team that we have here. 3, I really wanted to make sure that we walked away, and hopefully we did a decent job, where we gave you a better understanding of what corrections is and what we do at corrections, and all of the services and all the different areas, like in the chart that we showed you that we attack. It is a large department. It has, I think, a really strong vision and mission statement. Our people get behind it. They're very committed. They do heroics every day. As you can see that we're not standing, as Paul left off, as Paul talked about our awards, we're not standing there. We're not standing still. We have a lot of stuff that we're working on today, a lot of things that we're considering, and even trying to keep our eyes open on new emerging technologies. And again, we will not be successful without your ideas and your input and your business relationships. So I just want to thank you again for coming today.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you to the team and the department for coming today and spending your valuable time to share this great information. On behalf of the panel, I'd like to thank you all for coming. We look forward to seeing you at the next event on October 31st. Thank you very much.
Thank you.